I'm Karin Hurt, and we're here with our next edition of Asking for a Friend Live. And I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by April Rinne, who we're going to be talking about how do you thrive in a world that is constantly changing. So thank you so much for joining us. We're delighted to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Karin. I'm happy to be here. Delighted as well.
Great. So April has a brand new book, and it's not even out yet. This is a preview. It's coming out in about a month, which is called Flux. 8 superpowers for thriving in constant change. And I've had an opportunity to have a sneak peek, and I just love this concept. So we're going to unpack a bit of this today. So first, April, I was touched. Your story is sad and powerful, and how you got so interested in this. And so let's just start there. How did you become an expert in Flux?
Yeah. So great question, and happy to be here. And I think, it's interesting today. A lot of people know me as a futurist, and I'm looking at where's the world heading and where are you and your organization. And so there is an element of what I bring to Flux that's very much the sort of future forward, and how do we get through this together? And I bring a global lens. My entire career has been global, international, lots of different cultures and places that I've lived and immersed myself and absorbed how different people deal with change. But my entry to Flux, my baptism, so to speak, was actually more than 25 years ago. And when I was in college, and both of my parents died in a car accident. And that was that moment where whatever I thought my future was going to be just melted. It disappeared, How was I going to rebuild my family? What was I going to do about my career? I was 20, which is an interesting age, right? Because I was old enough to be at college and living independently, but I was still young enough to really not have a clear sense of how the world works or my role in it. And I now realize that was when my journey to Flux or through Flux began. And I became really, really interested in what do we do when change doesn't stop? And how do we know what to do when we don't know what to do?
Yeah, thank you so much. And, I was really, your journey, and this is such an important part of the book to understand your personal connection to that. So I do encourage people to read that. And I love how you weave that throughout your whole story. It's interesting because I know you began writing this book before the pandemic, because this is how these things go. Just like we started Courageous Cultures in our research before the pandemic, and neither one of us could have known what we would be, presenting the world that we would be presenting this book into. And so all of the work that you're doing is so timely. And, COVID is just one of those things, right? That's just one of those things where you need to be prepared for flux. So I do think this is a very timeless thing for people to be thinking about. I've had a number of folks on Asking for a Friend Live who are resiliency experts. And the reason I wanted to invite you is because I love their messages. And I also think you're taking a bit of a different angle, which is how do you live your life, prepare for whatever happens? Not just how do you respond to change, but how do you create a solid groundwork? So I'd love just to hear a little bit about your perspective on that.
Yeah, so this is great. And there's so many different angles I can take here, but let me try to weave together a few ideas from the book that may spark some more ideas, and we can go from there. So if you think about it, for the most part, when we think about how do we deal with change, how do we relate to change, what do we think about it and so forth, we think about reacting to change, which is like something happens and you react and then you move forward and life sort of returns. That's not how Flux works. This is more of the rather than reacting or responding, something changed and I have to respond to it. This is about reshaping our relationship to it from the inside out, meaning that change, it's not as though just responding to one change, something's somehow done. This is continual, sometimes people would say relentless change. And it's interesting because there are plenty of overlaps with resilience and agility and adaptability and all of that. But if we come back to the word resilience, this is one way I love to phrase it. A lot of times people think of resilience as elastic, right? Kind of like a rubber band. You stretch it and then you go back to the original form. Well, of course, I think all of us can relate in some way to the last 12 to 18 months of like, what do you do when whatever you want to go back to, it's no longer there, right? And that was the case with my parents as well. Like there was no going back. Resilience isn't one size fits all. It's not just one definition. Resilience also can mean plastic. So we think about it as elastic, like a rubber band. It's also plastic, which is more like a piece of clay. Plastic means you're actually shaping new forms, casting new horizons, developing new ways of seeing and being and leading and all the rest. And so I think of Flux more as plastic, where we're having to forge new territory. This isn't something that we have great experience with. This is something we kind of have to gird ourselves and get ready for long periods of experimentation, iteration, all of which are actually quite exciting when you think about our ability to do things new, not going back, building on what has worked well in the past that we may still be able to find around us, but really crafting, creating something new, and in the process, reshaping our relationship to change, how we relate to it full on, whole stop, whether that's today, tomorrow, or, well into the future.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And I know that you are, so I'm a certified yoga instructor. So this whole concept of yin, and I would love just to hear a little bit about, you have some perspectives on getting grounded in yin. And so what thoughts do you have for our listeners here on that?
Yeah, so it's quite fun because I bring lots of different lenses. I'm a certified yoga teacher. I'm mostly a futurist, a lawyer, an investor, like doing these other things. And then people are like, you do yoga too? And what's fun is there is actually a fair amount of yoga philosophy in the book, but I used that framing, that language pretty selectively, because there's actually a lot of wisdom we can bring, not just from yoga philosophy, but from many different modern and indigenous cultures. And so that shows up throughout the book, which is a real joy. But if we think about yin and yang, so these sort of forces that ideally are in harmony, and you've got yin energy and yang energy. And yang energy is typically what people would cast as male. It's bright, it's direct, it's intense. It's a sort of like, go for it kind of energy. Yin energy is softer, it's more subtle, it's looking at the relationships, it's looking at the whole, and it's sort of, it's more holistic, people would say, but it's also more, I would sometimes in the background. And yin energy is often female. So you've got yin and yang that are kind of in contrast. And well, there are lots of directions we can take this, but one of the ways that I think it shows up is that from a leadership perspective, and I think in the world at large, a lot of the problems that we are struggling with today come from what I would call a kind of yang overdose, where we've had a whole lot of yang energy in the leadership world, in the business world, in our relationships, and that's getting us out of whack. We're not in balance. We need, what I like to say, we need to yin our yang. We need to bring more yin energy into what we're doing. And just a quick footnote here, I am not saying this is about men versus women. I'm not saying simply we need more women in leadership positions, although we do. Every single person, man and woman, has both yin and yang. So this is not just what we need to do in the business world collectively. Each and every one of us needs to make sure that we are in balance with the different parts of ourselves, the different things that drive, as I've been looking at it, that drive our relationship to change, because that can bring both hope and fear, that can bring both optimism and anxiety. There are all of these kind of contrasts and paradoxes that we need to balance individually as well.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. So grounded in that. Now, on Asking for a Friend, we're all about super practical tools and techniques that you can use. So you have 8 superpowers that you've listed. I have my favorites, but I want to start and ask you about your favorite. But before we do that, if you're just joining us, we're here with April, and we're going to be talking about constant change and how do you live in a world of flux, and how do you prepare yourself for that. So if you have a question, would love, or a question from a friend, see one's already come in, please ask your questions in the chat, so we'll be sure to get to them. Okay, so over to you, April. What is your favorite superpower?
Yeah, this comes up. It's like asking which is your favorite kid, right? You really don't want to play favorites. And of course, I immediately want to know what your favorites are, because I'm finding my favorites often map to where there's most interest. I like all of them. I will admit they change on a maybe not daily, but certainly weekly basis, which one I'm digging into most.
Yep.
I was thinking about it, particularly in the context of today's audience. There are a couple that I would call out as particularly sticky. They're definitely my favorites of the moment, but I think they might also really resonate. So at a broad level, all 8 superpowers are valid on their own. They stand alone. They can be worked on their own. They don't depend on anything else. I would say, and this isn't the one I'll talk about, the superpower, the one that really pulls all of them together, is the 4th one, which is start with trust. So there's a whole bit about trust powers everything. When you think about how you navigate change, typically you do that with the help of your trusted relationships. You don't have them, you're struggling a lot more. Organizationally, I think we look at high trust and low trust organizations. Trust is sort of this meta superpower. But that said, there are a couple others that just to tease out really quickly. If we're looking at the future of work, then one of the most popular and one of my favorites is the 6th one, which is learning how to create your portfolio career. And that one is really about how we think about and shape our careers, and to treat them rather than like a career path that you pursue. Again, very linear, focused, look out, I'm going to control my future, which in a world in flux, you can't do that. Rather than seeing your career as a path to pursue, see it as a portfolio that you curate, as an artist or an investor would. So that's another favorite. And then I'll tease out one other one, which is the 5th one, know you're enough. That one has been getting just incredible traction, and I love how people are interpreting it, because that superpower is really trying to get at the heart of what I will call our obsession with more. Not just that more is better, but that we always need more. And I see that that's making a lot of people quite miserable and unhappy, myself included, for much of my life. But the way I like to phrase that one is that when you are always after more, you will never actually find enough. You'll be on that vicious cycle forever. But when you know you're enough, you will immediately begin to find abundance. So I think there's a whole lot we could dive into there.
Yeah. All right. So let's take these in reverse order. So know you're enough. That one is very interesting, because you have know you're enough, YOUR. And so, like, do you know what is enough for you?
Yep.
And then know your 'RE enough.
Yeah.
And so I think that both of those are so true. And, it was interesting. One of the things that I do believe really does help with flux, and it is to know you're enough and make sure that you aren't constantly needing more. And I have a number of friends, so I was at Verizon for 20 years, right? And so I have a number of friends who are still feeling like they have to stay and are not doing exactly what they might want to do, right? Because they're like, well, but my lifestyle, and I might like to be an entrepreneur, Karin, like you, but gosh, I need to stay because of this, and this. And I'm thinking, you must have enough, right?
Yeah.
And to not be able to follow, exactly what you want to do now. And so I think that that's part of one of the things, the reason that I have had the flexibility that I have to be able to take a leap and go start a company, is because, I didn't let my lifestyle just keep creeping up, and was able to live with enough. So your thoughts on that, and other folks that you've worked with?
You nailed it in so many ways. I mean, know you're enough gets really rich really fast. And I love that you bring up, I've had lots of people say to me, hey, that's a typo. Not know you're enough. Isn't it know you are enough? And there's actually a section in the chapter that says, knowing you're enough, YOUR, so your point of sufficiency and contentedness and enoughness. Knowing you're enough includes knowing that you are enough right now, today, without ever doing anything else. And candidly, you've always been enough from the moment you were born and brought into this earth. The challenge is that society does a really good job of convincing us that we are not enough, and that the only way we're going to be enough is to have more. And here we could talk about, more income, more power, more likes, more followers, more whatever. And yet, where did that come from? That's a cycle we're running in our minds, but it actually has no bearing in reality. And so there's a piece about this too that is very much around our happiness, our contentedness as well. And so it shows up like that. It shows up with people who feel stuck and trapped on the hamster wheel and can't get off because they haven't figured out they're enough. And so their default is only more. And yet, in fairness, I have never met anybody. This takes me back kind of to my parents and some of that existential stuff around on your deathbed. What are you going to regret? Are you going to regret not trying and actually, living your dream and risking? Or are you going to regret the fact that you were constantly after more and had enough all along?
Yeah.
So it's fascinating. Yeah.
Thank you. Now let's talk about the portfolio career, because we hear a lot about that, and I really do believe in that, and that you are building skills along the way. And part of this is, how do you leverage what you've learned and pull it into something that now might feel like something completely different?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I was really reflecting on from my own career when I was thinking about this is how you talk about, setting a directional intention, but then being open to what are the possibilities that might emerge along the way. And I was laughing because when I was 22 years old, I thought I wanted to develop, I actually got an LLC. I called it Values and Vision. I had a leadership development company I was trying to start. Well, I wasn't ready. Right. Part of the reason we are so successful now is because we've lived there, been there, done that, led a 10,000 person organization. Now I can teach you how to do this. Right. But for some reason, my sweet self thought, I'm ready to do a leadership development company. But my intention was there. And then I have been through this and that. Right. I was HR then I led a large sales team, led a customer service organization. Now I'm running a leadership development company. And I feel like it wasn't like I was like, someday. I kind of like, well, that was nice, but that's not what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to go be a corporate executive. But I think I had a friend who said once to me, what's for you won't miss you. And I think it's kind of that there has been a pull that has brought me back. And now it's only in hindsight that I'm like, I've wanted to do this all along. But while I was in my Verizon roles, I wasn't thinking, someday I'm going to run the leadership development program. So I think that this is when people think of their career and a portfolio career, I'd love your perspective on, how do you keep an intention out there? How do you stay connected to what really is important and your gifts to bring to the world? But how do you not lose the opportunities that might feel like side roads along the way?
Oh, I love this, Karin. So it's funny because when you were talking earlier, the theme, there's a concept in another chapter on getting lost, which I want to pull out because you sort of referenced it, and it's called cattywampling. So if you've never heard the word cattywample, I mean, what a fun word to say. It actually is a word, and it means to travel purposefully towards an as yet unknown destination. And I love that because there's this sense of you're traveling with purpose. And so much of what you're describing right now, too, is very much, it's a sort of narrative, overall, the kind of meta arc of Flux, which is what makes you, even when everything else changes? That is a question that if you can answer that, and I'm looking at you going like, you've been answering that, right? That's what's hard for people. If you can answer that and then you look at your career in a way that can fold around that answer, you're going to be set. Now you're going to go do things that you never thought you would do. You're going to have titles you never imagined you'd have. Some of the stuff's going to seem like off kilter, but to your point, every time you're learning or doing anything, and again, doesn't matter the title, doesn't matter if it's paid, doesn't matter if society thinks it's important. If you're learning skills and building on what makes you are actively contributing to your portfolio. And so everyone's portfolio is unique. Actually, one thing I always like to make clear in conversations like this, every single person already has a portfolio. You may just not know it yet.
Yes.
But in your portfolio is everything that you've ever done, A, that you love, that you enjoy doing, but B, that can contribute to society. And so you're constantly mixing and matching and mixing and matching. Some people also have, just in the spirit of kind of teasing out what analogy might work for you, some people think of portfolios as more like a jungle gym rather than a ladder. Some people call them like a bento box. What you just described, I've often called it like a flower as well, in which what you're doing is you're creating your own flower, and each of your roles, each of those chapters in your book of life is a different petal. And over time, you're building this richer, more colorful, bigger, more blossomy flower that's also more valuable to society. And so you just keep doing that. But it does require, I find, not everyone does this on day one. If you can, it's so much better to have that clarity around what makes you you. And for example, if it's leadership development, there are 10,000 plus ways that you can work on that goal, that purpose. Because everything you were doing before, even if leadership or leadership development wasn't in the title or in the organization, was leading you to that end goal, to that, that bigger vision, that clarity. And so that's what I find when you're clear on what makes you you, you're opening up actually a lot more opportunities that fit very much within your purpose, even though it may not be that job description that you thought you would be reading kind of thing.
Yes, I love that. And, it's interesting because I think that part of when you're building a portfolio career is to know those strengths that you have and to bring them in even and offer them. I remember when I moved from HR, I've been in HR for 10 years, then I moved to leading large call centers. And my boss, Maureen, who was fantastic, said to me, whatever you do, don't lose that HR mindset, right? You're leading large teams now, all those gifts, use them. And I expect you to be my strategic HR advisor for our whole organization while you're doing this. And so it was more like a build. It wasn't like something for completely different. It was a build on what I had already established. We have a very good question. I'll let you add a question.
Let me add something here because it's really good. There's another quote. The quote is actually from Jerry Garcia, which, I love the quote though. And it speaks exactly to what you're saying. And he says, don't be the best, be the only. And what we're looking at, and it's not to say don't strive to be the best as well, but chances are pretty good that whatever you like to do, someone in the world is as good, if not better than you at it, that one thing. But it's the combination of skills that you have that no one else has in that combination. So I love, and you talk about HR. I was a lawyer for many years. Now, most people today have no idea I was a lawyer. And I'm your most antithetical lawyer you can imagine. My legal training comes in handy every day for how it helps me think. You learn, it's the most empowering degree out there. But if you don't know what your rights are, you don't actually know what to stand for. You don't know how so many systems in our society work. So I bring this up simply because I haven't practiced law in years, and yet it's been one of the most powerful latent papers in my portfolio that I never want to lose sight of, even though it's not something I actively do anymore. So another great one is, anyone who's a parent. Parenting teaches you so many useful skills that we don't typically get to put on a CV.
Yeah.
And yet those are some of the most powerful skills for leading and for, conflict resolution, project management, you name it. And, those show up in your portfolio as well. So I love what you bring up though. It is that sense, it's the combination of what all the things that you can do that no one else can do because no one's had your life experience, and then being able to convert that into a narrative that you share with others, which is how you either get a job or build your business or, actively do those things in the world.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. We have a question coming in from Michelle. I love the idea of trust as a superpower. What do you recommend to people who have been burned or wounded by negative work experiences in the past to help them move into a trusting space? So what a perfect courageous cultures question. How do you help people navigate the narrative around trust?
Yeah. So what a wonderful question. Thank you, Michelle. And there are, it's like that dagger in your heart when you hear about people who have experienced mistrust. And I think we all have in some way, but when it's really actually gone to their core and a bad experience with one person colors or shades your experience or your assumptions about everybody. So you had one bad experience with trust and you assume that everyone is untrustworthy. And I'm not saying you're doing that. Like, I'm saying that's often where our brains go.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm really starting, so the way that I define this superpower is that when trust seems broken, assume good intent. So what we're looking at here is resetting our kind of default assumption, because for the most part, and again, this includes me for much of my life, our default assumption, society has told us that the average person is not trustworthy. So even with you, Karin, like if I didn't know you, on balance, if I am just meeting you, society has told me I should not trust you. And you should not trust me because, don't trust strangers. Like, it's a narrative we have in our society. And yet, what have we just done? We've just cut ourselves off from one another. If we started to reset the default assumption that the average individual is trustworthy, the average individual wants to help, is a good person, we're not negating that there aren't bad apples in the bunch, like Michelle, like the person you're describing, but it does help us to reset. You have a bad experience, but you still believe in the goodwill and good intentions of others on balance. Now, that's not blind trust, that's not naive trust, but it does require giving people the benefit of the doubt. And I would say when trust goes sideways, when there is that untrustworthy, mistrustworthy experience, getting to the bottom of why that happened and how that happened is actually an important part of the healing process, both to figure out where did I go wrong, where should I have not done something or misread something. But also what I find typically too is if you have the opportunity to speak with the person whose trust was compromised, you start to learn more about their own history. And on balance, think about when kids are born. They're born trusting everybody. We humans, we grow up to become untrustworthy. We're not born that way. And so understanding another person's story and context around trust also can help you better unpack what happened to be able to make you feel a little bit more whole again, which in turn helps you approach that next person, that next interaction from, again, a basic premise of trustworthiness of the average individual. So there's a lot more I could share there, but I just kind of want to get that out there. Yeah. It's a hornet's nest, but it's so important and something that we, I think, societally desperately need today.
Yes, I so agree with you. Dr. Amy Edmondson, who is pioneer in psychological safety, wrote the foreword to our book, Courageous Cultures. Mm-hmm. And, a lot of that research really talks about how humans are more likely to hold on to a negative experience than a positive experience. So even if we've had 8 great trusting bosses, who really had our backs, but we had that one jerk, right? Where that one sticks out in our minds and we approach things with such caution. And so one of the things we encourage people to do is think about your other past experiences, the positive ones, and pull from those to give yourself the courage to move forward. Because it is hard. And we also say, it's very likely that, so if you've got somebody who's broken your trust, they did not wake up in the morning, start brushing their teeth and say, how I'm going to do today? I'm really going to screw over April, right? It's just not, it's something, to your point, something else is going on. And getting underneath what that actually is can be very helpful.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we are coming to the top of the hour. So I just want to give you an opportunity to share any final bits of practical wisdom that you have for folks, and just let them know where they can get the book and when it will be out.
Yeah, thank you so much. So the book is Flux, 8 Superpowers for Thriving in Constant Change. It will be out on August 24th. Although if you are an audiobook reader, it's out now. So the audiobook is available. You can buy it on Amazon or any retailer out there. But the easiest place to learn more about Flux is at my website, fluxmindset.com. So in addition to the superpowers, a central concept is this whole notion of what is a flux mindset, the state of mind that can thrive in constant change. So that's where you can learn more. I think, wrapping up very briefly, this is we are in a world in flux, and the future is not more certain. The future is not more stable. The future is actually more change and more flux. And so, as I like to say, when everything is in flux, everything can benefit from a flux mindset and the flux superpowers. So I hope you join me on this journey. Thank you so much.
Thank you so very much. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Likewise. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much. Just want to give you some insights here. As you know, most of our leadership programs are very customized and in-house, but at your request, we have been asked to do an open enrollment program this fall. Practical leadership development for human-centered leaders will be focusing on some of our really fundamentals. So if you have a handful of leaders or you're interested in joining us, we'll put a link so you can learn more, or you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn, and we can talk more about that. And we're excited about our coming shows. So for the next couple weeks, we'll be on heavy business travel and some other opportunities. So we'll have some recorded versions coming up over the next 2 weeks. But then after that, we are going to be doing a nice deep dive on the ROI of getting underneath in-person versus remote work. And we have an ROI expert, Jack Phillips, who will be joining us. So get your questions ready and join us on August 20th for that live show. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time on Asking for a Friend.